pleased when they catch their children in a lie. And so then you have to ask, well, why is that? It has to be because people believe that the truth is the proper way to proceed. And it isn't obvious why they believe that, but it's obvious that they act as if they do believe that. And then I would also say, well, there's more to it than that, because we know, for example, that societies that have a high level of trust, and there aren't that many of those in the world, they happen to almost all be Western societies, where there's a high level of trust, there's a high level of economic development. They're unbelievably highly associated. And I've never been able to figure out how countries ever became not corrupt. Like, it just seems completely impossible to me for countries that were corrupt once to ever become not corrupt. I don't understand how that happens at all. But there's a handful of countries in the world that are fundamentally not corrupt, where your default presupposition when you deal with a stranger, let's say in a financial transaction, is that you don't have to be on guard like you're investigating a pit of vipers, because the person is likely to act out what they say they'll do. And it reduces the transaction, the unnecessary transaction costs, to about zero, right? Because I can take you at your word. We don't know each other. I can take you at your word. A good example of that is eBay, you know, because eBay was stranger transactions, and people were concerned it would degenerate into an unplayable game, and turned out that the default trade on eBay was, like, if you have 98% seller rating on eBay, you're actually a crook. You know, you need 99% or above. It's so high, it's unbelievable. So we do know that trust is necessary. We do assume that people shouldn't lie. We are upset if our children don't tell the truth. We feel that that's a moral failing, but we're not very courageous, because we won't live out the full implications of that. So the third part of Genesis that I'd like to concentrate on very briefly is the part that makes the Declaration of Independence self-evident, and that is that man and woman alike are made in the image of God. And that's a very mysterious statement, because, well, first of all, it seems on the face of it absurd, partly because it turns God into something approximating a person, because there's an equation there, and it's not obvious what that might mean. But it's also not clear what being made in the image of God would mean, given that by that point in the book you don't know much about God, except that you do know that he uses logos to extract order out of chaos. That's about all you know, and that's good. And so the proposition there, as far as I'm concerned, is that that's what human beings do. That's what we do. And that this is way more important than people think, that we are co-creators of reality. Now you think, well, do you believe that? Well, let's think about that for a minute or two. It's like, you know, the standard scientists, they tend to think of human beings as materialist and deterministic. And I don't think that works very well for consciousness. I don't think there's any evidence that it works as an explanation for consciousness at all. And I think consciousness is self-evident. I mean, we certainly act as if it's self-evident. You act like you're conscious. You act like all the people around you are conscious. They're not happy if you don't act like they're conscious, that's for sure. You're not going to get along with yourself or your family members or society at large if you don't treat people like they're conscious. You're also not going to get along with any of them unless you treat them like they are active agents that have some role in determining their own destiny, right? I mean, God, you see that in 2-year-olds, you know, when they're already pushing for autonomy. And so we make these assumptions that, well, we have this capacity for autonomous choice. And I'm going to split an argument into 2 parts here. The first thing is, I don't think that we can be deterministic, because it looks like neurobiologically that if you want to run deterministically, like on habit, which would be what deterministically would be, you have to practice and practice and practice and practice and practice and build all the machinery that allows you to act deterministically, and then there'll be a stimulus and the whole deterministic process will lay itself out, but that doesn't happen unless you've built the machinery. So like if you're a tennis pro, you know, you're acting deterministically all the time because you don't have enough time to consciously decide what you're going to do when a ball is coming at you so fast you can't actually see it properly. It's all reflex, but it's really complicated chains of reflexes, and you spent like $10,000 building them. And so fine, and when you're driving your car, or you're walking, you're doing these things that you've practiced so well, you're deterministic. But when you encounter the chaos of the day, that's a whole different story. And so what consciousness seems to do actually is to act when deterministic processes aren't at hand. So we could walk through that. We could say, look, here's one way of thinking about yourself. You're a clock, and you're wound up, and you wind down mechanistically. But the clock mechanism has to be there for you to wind down mechanistically. And unless you've practiced something a long time, it's not there. So I don't see how determinism can account for that. So here's an alternative, and you can tell me if this is in keeping with your experience. So you wake up in the morning, your consciousness reemerges from the darkness in which it's been embedded, like the sun coming up, right? Which is why consciousness has always been associated with the sun. We're daytime creatures, and we're creatures of vision. And so we identify consciousness with the light, with illumination, with enlightenment. You wake up in the morning, and what do you have in front of you? Well, it depends whether you're excited or worried, but it doesn't really matter, because it's the same thing. What you have in front of you, this is as far as I can tell, is that you have a field of possibility. You have a field of potential. You might wake up and worry. You think, well, I have to do this, or, you know, this series of negative consequences might emerge, and I have these obligations that need to be taken care of for the same reason. Duties, you know, tax bills that have to be opened before they turn into some sort of terrible monster, or work requirements that need to be done for the same reason, to keep chaos at bay. And that'll run through your mind, and if it's overwhelming, if there's too much chaos in your life, you might wake up in the middle of the night and have all that running through your head. You have all this potential of what could be manifesting itself in front of you. And that can be very stressful. It can also be very exciting, right? Because the flip side of that obligation is opportunity, and so you see in front of you this field of potential that's opportunity. But what you see, as far as I can tell, with your consciousness is the potential that could be, right? You see a sequence of worlds that you have some causal ability to bring into being. And you act like that. You think, well, I have to do this because then this will happen, or if I don't do this, then this will happen. And hopefully, if you're not too skewed, most of the decisions you make are positive ones, because you want to take the potential that's in front of you, the chaos, and you want to turn it into a reality that's good. And most of the time, you're going to assume, although you may be tempted not to from time to time, that the best way to do that is to confront that potential forthrightly and to deal with it in a positive and truthful manner, and that the hopeful consequence of that will be that, well, even if you don't produce something good, it will be less hellish than it might have been, right? But maybe you'll get lucky because you're focused and you're doing your best and you're confronting what's there as potential, and you turn it into something good. And then you can live with yourself properly, and you don't wake up in the middle of the night and bemoan your lost opportunities and your lost possibilities. And so I think that what we are as individuals are spirits that confront the potential of reality and transform it into the actuality of reality as a consequence of our ethical decisions. That's what it looks like. And I think that that's why there's an insistence in Genesis that we're made in the image of God, because we're partaking in the same process continually. And you know, you think, well, do you believe that? Well, let's look at how you act. I mean, the first thing is, you tend to think of your kids as full of potential, and you tend to think of the world that confronts them as full of opportunity. I mean, or full of potential, for that matter. And the whole potential thing is a very strange notion, and we don't think about it much. And I think it's mostly because we're materialistic. It's like there's nothing material about potential. It's not here. It's not here now. It's out there, whatever that means, in the future, with no qualities whatsoever except our apprehension of it. It has no weight, it has no mass, it has no being whatsoever. It's just what could be. But we treat it as if it's more real than anything else, what could be. And then if we have children and they don't live up to their potential, they don't take advantage of their opportunities, then we're angry at them. We say, you had this potential that you could have done something with and you didn't do it. And so that you've sacrificed your own potential by not taking advantage of this opportunity, and you've made yourself in the world less than it could be. And you're never happy about that, not when you're dealing with someone that you love. You're always upset because you see very clearly that they are not being who they could be. And you see very clearly that that's a downward path. And it's definitely not something that you want for your children. Then you think too, well, what about how you treat other people, yourself? Well, conscience is a good example of that. You let an opportunity go by, so you have some potential that manifests itself in front of you as a doorway through which you could pass, and maybe you forego the opportunity because you're faithless and afraid. And I mean, that happens to everyone, but it doesn't mean that you're going to let yourself off the hook for that. You know, if you look at older people and you ask them what they regret in their lives, it's not the opportunities they took, it's the opportunities they could have taken and didn't. And it's because I believe that deep in their conscience, part of our structure, our deep, deep structure, we have a known moral obligation to take what's offered to us in its full catastrophe and to make the best of it, and to do that properly with our ethical choices, and that we do not let ourselves off the hook if we fail at that. And then I don't believe that we can organize our human relationships without believing that, because, well, if I believe you have no agency and no capacity for your own choice and your own, I believe you have no ability to transform the future into the present, into the reality of the present, you're going to react to that like it's demeaning and patronizing. I have to treat you like a moral agent of worth. I have to do that to me. I have to do that to my kids. I have to do that to my friends. And if we do try to establish a community, like a political community, and we don't use that as an axiom, then the political community is a bloody catastrophe. And so that's part of what makes me think that this sort of thing is real. It's like, well, it's real enough so that it governs your relationship with yourself, whether you want it to or not. It's real enough that it governs your relationship with your children and the rest of your family. It's real enough that if you don't build your political system with those self-evident axioms, then you just get a catastrophic tyranny. It's like, that's pretty real. So those are the self-evident propositions. And so I've been talking to people and trying to remind them of this, you know, because we're in danger of losing this, and we shouldn't be losing it because there's something about it that seems to be correct. I think people are afraid of it, and they should be. I mean, one of the statements with regards to my introduction was that my observation as a clinician was that no one ever got away with anything. And I believe that. I've seen that, because you make a mistake, especially a conscious mistake, and you think you've got away with it, and you wait. It'll come back years later. Something you bent the fabric of reality in some manner, and in the short term you got away with it, you know, no one noticed, but that has consequences that unfold, and sooner or later the chickens come home to roost. And sometimes it takes years, if you're doing therapy with someone and they've gone off on a very bad pathway, to trace all the decisions all the way back to that one decision you made that you knew was wrong when you made it, and you made it anyways, and then you forgot about it because you don't remember every decision you make, and your life has gone off astray in some terrible manner.